Cypress Development Corp. is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp. trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Welcome back to the show, Kris, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Thank you for having me on again.
Kris, the Fraser Institute in Vancouver has done a study, and it claims, after crunching the numbers, that the Trudeau government has now spent more money than per capita, apparently, than Canada did during the First or Second World Wars, when we were fighting for our individual freedom.
We were just looking at these stats coming from the Fraser Institute, which does excellent work. I'd encourage anybody to spend their afternoon thumbing through their website. They've got very good, substantial reports on there going back several years. And looking at this one, you're right. They did some number crunching and they went to per capita, and they said that spending in 2019 was about $9,000 per Canadian. It topped the previous record that was set by Prime Minister Stephen Harper during the global recession. So people could argue whether or not that was justified during a recession, but spending is spending. So Trudeau topped that out last year by about $9,000 per Canadian. And then they did the comparison, which is really interesting, back to 1943, so in the middle of World War II. And in our current dollars, they were spending $7,000 per person, and then it dropped down almost to nothing, to $1,700 after the Second World War had ended. So there was this big spike, obviously in the middle of the Second World War, where government spending went up. Most people would say it was required to go up. And then it dropped back down to about $1,700 in real money, today's money. Why? Why are we spending $9,000 per person today when, thank goodness, we're not in the middle of a global recession and we're not, thank goodness, in the middle of a world war? These numbers and their comparison is really stark.
Well, is it? I mean, again, this spending was done during so-called good times when Canada had record low unemployment. What happens when the next recession hits and people will actually need government assistance to survive? This
is what we're terribly afraid of. I know here at the CTF we're afraid about it. I know our colleagues at Fraser Institute and many other kind of economic thinkers and tax policy analysts are really worried about this. And they've been all out but pleading with the federal government to rein in their spending because, as you point out, for the last few years, our economy has been doing quite well. You know, of course, there are those in, say, the forestry industry or the oil patch who would beg to personally differ, and we know that that's true. But generally speaking, our economy has been doing fairly well. And one of the reasons, obviously, for that is that the United States economy is on fire. They're breaking records. It's an astounding amount of economic activity and very low unemployment rates in the States. And so when they're doing great, we're obviously going to be doing pretty darn well because our economies are completely linked. So if we're spending like this now, like drunken sailors now, blowing through budgets and not even caring about it during the last federal election, so much so that they were almost never talking about balancing a budget, what happens when things slow down and the interest rates go up and unemployment numbers go up? This is harrowing.
Well, of course, I also wonder, too, do we have enough money in the EI fund? Have they been bleeding it off to pay for other things besides unemployed people?
That's a great question. And so we'll have to look at that and monitor it as we go forward and make sure that they're not taking out of it as had happened before. They'd raided EI funds previously during the early 2000s, of course. So we don't want to see that happen again. We're also seeing, there's good news coming out of New Year's tax changes, for example. At the beginning of this year federally, they increased the basic personal amount of your exemption up to $15,000. And so that's very good. That's a real tax cut for the vast majority of Canadians. But on the other side of things, they can't keep blowing their budgets like this. They can't keep overspending on things that we don't need. Government can't be the answer for all people, for all things. And that's what they're trying to do all the time. And so while we will praise them in one way because they're cutting a very serious tax there by increasing the basic personal amount to $15,000, that's nice, but they can't just on the other side of the ledger just go blowing it all the time. So they got to really pay attention to this. And on your point on EI, they did make some tweaks to how much you need to put in. It wasn't that much of a difference. They also made some tweaks to pension as well. But they got to keep on top of this stuff because it's eventually going to come home to roost. And we're just not seeing it. We're not hearing any mentions coming from Minister Morneau about this, of him saying he's taking it seriously, of buckling down. We just can only hope that someone like Paul Martin, the former finance minister and former prime minister, can speak to his Liberal friends and get them to really start taking budget deficits seriously.
The Trudeau government often uses the excuse, well, compared to the other G7 nations, our debt ratio is the lowest. But isn't that like saying, among this gang of thieves, I steal the least?
Yeah, exactly. Or put in the other term that our mothers always like to use, if all your friends jumped off a bridge. Comparing yourself to other countries is good in some ways, where you can talk about maybe how well you're doing for using your energy efficiently, how much bumper crop you're producing each year, how free you are compared to other supposedly just societies. There's all sorts of nice benchmarks and comparators. But if you start getting into, well, we're completely blowing through our budget like a bunch of drunken crazy people, but those guys over there are way worse, come on. Like that isn't what a mature, intelligent person does. They need to get their own books and their own houses in order to save, in order to be prudent, because we know that good times and sunshiny haymaking doesn't last forever. Things go up and down in cycles, and we got to be braced for the down. It's similar here in BC, where we see the operating deficit gone, which is great. We don't want to see operating debt, but the actual debt of British Columbia is still going up at a very alarming rate. We're going to be clocked over $70 million soon. That's a serious amount, so we got to get on that.
Right, that's like buying your groceries and paying your rent with your credit card sooner or later, yeah. Exactly,
and you have to pay that. That will eventually come due. And then, do we pay it? Do our children pay it? Do we need to bring in a heck of a lot more skilled immigrants as workers in order to increase our population to pay it? Because those guys are in very high demand. They're not really easy to find. Everybody wants those great skilled people to come live in your area to become productive members of society. But you got to figure this out. And so federally and provincially, we got to get on this.
What's the Taxpayer Federation position on cities or places like provinces or states who say, if you come in and set up a new business, we'll give you free land and let you work tax-free for 10 years?
That's an innovative idea. We'd have to look at that. That sounds like something back when we were getting folks to move to the prairies, for example, when they were coming from all over places like England and other parts of Europe. Folks were coming in from Russia and Poland and you name it, and they offered free land, quote unquote, but they had to do a certain amount of work for it. The CPR did very similar things in order to really help populate the West. That's something we'd have to consider.
Well, that's what Lubbock, Texas does, the home of Buddy Holly.
Interesting.
Just saw a story on Alberta oil workers there. If you start up a business, the city will give you the land for free and won't charge you taxes because they know they make their money from property tax.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then those businesses employ people, and those people who are now employed and making more money then spend their money on needed foodstuffs and items in the community. It's wonderful how the system works when you actually get out of the way and let it work.
We'll have more with Kris Sims right after the break.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Kris Sims. Kris, the BC government held their notorious investigation into high gasoline prices, excluding, of course, looking into government policies and government taxes. How honest was that inquiry? And is it right for the government to blame the oil companies for not explaining a 10% markup?
This is such a silly situation for many reasons. So at the height of the gas price, it was over $1.70 per liter last spring in Metro Vancouver. It was such a sight to behold. People couldn't afford to fill up their vehicles. It was just an outrageous amount of expense for folks. And it's still expensive, darn it. We're still the most expensive in all of North America, even though it's not over $1.70. But then we had the Premier of British Columbia, who he and his NDP Green team are often telling us to make alternative choices and to prod the market and to make things a bit more uncomfortable, meaning higher gas prices so you can't afford it, so you don't drive and you don't buy gasoline. We had him wandering around the legislature looking wide-eyed into camera saying, wow, look at these high gas prices. Something's got to be done about this. It was so weird because he and his government are one of the major reasons why we have very high gas prices. One, as you point out, is government policy. So if you, for example, dig your heels in and kick and fight and scream and try to blockade something like the twinning of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which delivers gas products to the Lower Mainland, thus increasing supply, and you jack up taxes on said product, you're going to have a higher price. Everybody who thinks about it knows if you choke supply and increase taxes on a product that is in high demand, the price goes up. So for him to say, we're going to have an inquiry, but you can't look at what my government's doing, is really disingenuous, and we don't know why he even bothered calling it. We're going to try to find out as soon as we can, through access to information and freedom of information, how much we spent on that. Why did we bother doing an inquiry when we blindfolded the investigators?
Now, of course, BC's holding an inquiry into money laundering, but we had a provincial government, the Liberal government, who disbanded the special police unit that would look into money laundering at casinos. And there doesn't really seem to be much will to change the whole mindset. And with all the money the governments make from lotteries in general, what's to stop the drug dealers and money launderers from just buying a lot of lottery tickets and laundering their money that way?
Isn't this sad? It's one of those situations where every time you read about it, it seems to get more and more complicated and go deeper and deeper into history. We need a full inquiry. They can't just go halfway on this. If this is as serious an issue as it seems to be, based on the reporting that we're seeing from various news outlets over the past couple of years here in BC, they got to get to the bottom of it. They can't allow that amount of criminal activity, or really any criminal activity, hopefully, to be going on in a government-controlled industry like lottery and gaming. And if they make tax dollars off of legitimate spending at a casino and through lottery and gaming, fine. But I don't know many British Columbian taxpayers that are wanting to look the other way while potentially highly illegal money laundering is going on, even if they somehow benefited through it in some way, shape, or form through tax dollars. Because if it's dirty, it's dirty. It also, the connection that apparently is being made to, in some cases, the housing situation in Metro Vancouver, where there's allegedly laundering going on at a casino, and then it's allegedly again laundered through some other third party for mortgage repayments. It's a very complicated system that they use. Who knows what kind of impact that's having on our housing prices and our real estate market. So that's near and dear to most people's hearts, being able to afford a place to live in earnest, real ways, to be able to afford to rent it or buy it. And if we're getting our distortion coming from something like this, darn straight we need to get to the bottom of it. And it's not a partisan issue. This doesn't matter if it's the BC Liberals or the Greens or the NDP or the Flying Monkey Party who's responsible, quote unquote, or who was in power when most of it happened. They just need to be as open and honest and clear in their inquiry as possible. And that means as few restrictions as possible.
Well, the BC government is bragging about its foreign buyer's tax, which my sources tell me hasn't been a factor at all because of the downturn in international economics. But they're bragging about people losing 20% of their home equity, which for many people was their retirement plan. Is that anything to brag about?
No, it's not. And it's one of those things where on the surface, when you first hear about it, it sounds like they're trying to do something about the affordability issue, especially in places like Metro Vancouver and Victoria, which on the surface sounds like a good thing. But as you point out, when you scratch beneath the surface, if you've got a foreign buyer's tax, do we really think that the typical, I'll say stereotypical overseas millionaire, just imagine him in your head or her in your head. They make hundreds of millions of dollars a year, let's say, and they buy up property that they don't even bother living in Metro Vancouver at an outrageous price. Do you think they're going to care about a small percentage increase in their tax? No, that won't do anything. The only thing it'll do is take in a little bit of extra money into the BC budget, but it won't prevent that rich mega millionaire from buying up that property and or leaving it vacant. It's just not going to happen. But what it will do, if you take that same thinking into something that they called the school tax, for example, that's being applied to every home worth more than $4 million, and that heavily applies in places like West Vancouver and some portions of North Vancouver, and they turn around and say, now you guys have this new school tax, and it doesn't go to schools. They just called it schools so that we wouldn't bother it in the budget. It's just a tax. It's a home tax. So that's what they're doing provincially for everybody who owns a home more than $4 million. But those folks, like you said, were counting on that for their retirement or to give to their own family members so that they can buy homes or that they can go to universities. And it's their own money. It's their own property. But the BC government saw a population of people that they hoped people wouldn't have sympathy for. Now what happens if you take that a step further? What happens when they're looking for money? Because they're razor thin right now. Their balanced budget is balanced on like a cat's whisker right now. When they start looking for more money, wait until they try to drop that threshold down to $2 million. Now you're getting into family homes in places like Kitsilano, even in places of Burnaby. It's easy to find a family home technically worth more than $2 million. And we're worried that that's the route they're going.
We'll have more with Kris Sims right after the break.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlan, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the 2019 drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Kris Sims. Kris, did a group of bureaucrats who spend our money give themselves a big award for spending our money?
Yes, this is one of those cringy moments that you dig up if you sit there and studiously send in access to information requests. And I wanted to give credit where it's due. There's a very small, tiny independent journalism outfit in Ottawa called Blacklock's Reporter. They do all their own independent journalism, and their main focus is uncovering government waste. And they uncovered this access to information request and found out that top bureaucrats, so senior bureaucrats, those aren't political staff. They're the ones that work at departments, so they have basically jobs for life. Bureaucrats in Ottawa threw themselves an award gala dinner last February 2019, and it included velvet ropes, red carpets, black tie tuxedo, cocktail dresses, and they gave each other etched crystal trophies that cost more than $2,000, and they spent more than $12,000 of your taxpayer dollars awarding themselves. They wanted an Oscar-like atmosphere. Keep in mind, these are like pencil pushers. These are like bureaucrats. These are paper pushers in Ottawa giving themselves awards for communicating, and they're getting you to pay for it. So this is just one of those mind-boggling, tone-deaf things that we see coming from the federal government, where they're taking your money, and it's real dollars. Imagine going up and down your street and door knocking and asking people for $1,000 each or $500 each. Why? Oh, we want to give bureaucrats some trophies. You wouldn't make it down the street, but that's what they did. And so, yeah, it's some of that spending has been uncovered. We do a lot of this digging as well, but this one really stands out because of the language being used in the emails. Apparently, Jim, they were dickering over what kind of ham they should be ordering, like what would be the fancier type in order to suit the occasion.
Kris, the city of Vancouver, I think they settled on a 7% property tax hike after threatening 9.2%. So, of course, 7 seems like a big break. What are they spending this money on, and is it a good use of taxpayer money?
It isn't a good use of taxpayers' money because they've really moved away from the basics of what people expect municipal governments to actually spend their money on. So to give you an example, when they were first going into the negotiations, like you said, they were threatening something crazy like around a 9% tax hike. And this is the oldest trick in the book. They go in high, they come down slightly lower, and then they want you to praise them for saving them so much money. Just standard parlor trick. But unfortunately, it's largely worked. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. So what we took a look at is I went back through their budgets over the past 5 years or so, and I noticed a trend. So spending percentages. The percentage of spending on things like public art has gone up, I think it was around 160%. Spending on things like communications with their massive communication staff, I think it was 180%. Whereas their spending increased percentages on things like policing, it was around 20%. Same sort of thing for fire rescue. You get into garbage collection and the percentages have gone down. And road repair, potholes and garbage collection, road repair stayed about the same. So when you poll people in municipal districts and ask them what their priorities should be coming from City Hall, they usually say 3 things. Fix my roads, pick up my garbage, and keep my streets safe. So they want potholes, basically, pick up the garbage, and keep policing going. Those weren't the percentage increase priorities coming from Vancouver City Hall over the past 5 years. And as you've mentioned before on the show, Sam Sullivan, when he was mayor, I think he had communication staff, I think it was under 10 people. Now, the last we saw, it was more than 40 people apparently working under communications.
Yes, and for 3 years I tried to get an interview with Mayor Gregor Robertson, and I would call every week and ask for 10 minutes, and over 3 years, his 42 people somehow couldn't chisel 10 minutes out of his very busy schedule of visiting Taiwanese pop stars and going to environmental conferences around the planet. Apparently, during his tenure, he spent almost a year outside of Vancouver attending all these special events.
Wow. And see, this isn't what we are supposed to be paying municipal taxes for. Municipal taxpayers, property taxpayers, and business taxpayers are not footing the bills for these folks to become international nose-counting celebrities of the government type. If they want to have that kind of lifestyle, they should try to find some other form of employment. But getting your way into city halls is not supposed to be a golden ticket to go do that. Okay? You have to be a world-class engineer or some other reason for you to be able to travel like that. City government is supposed to be very simple. And it should be very simple. In fact, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, it shouldn't be a full-time job. This should be something that you do as, say, a retired teacher, because you know all the people in the community, or a retired police officer, same reason, or a current business owner who works with things like the Chambers of Commerce and your own business improvement associations. Because why? You have a vested interest in making sure that your city is well run. Those sorts of makeups at city councils are often the best forms of city councils, and it's a part-time gig. This was not supposed to be, at local government levels, a full-time, star-spangled career job that pays you an incredible amount of money and jets you around the planet. But increasingly, Jim, that is where we're going. And guess who pays the bill? We all do. Taxpayers do. And now these folks are going to be paying even more. And what was upsetting is that they don't seem to realize, some of them do, but most around the Vancouver council table didn't seem to notice that people are having trouble making ends meet, and that the cost of living in Vancouver is extremely high for many people. How they've missed that, we don't know. But they turned around and did that. I will also note, and this was sad, the last I was able to tell, it looked like they actually reduced funding to the downtown east side, to apparently folks who get down there and try to clean stuff up or fix stuff up. Last I saw, they were considering cutting it, I think, by $500,000. I'd have to check the final numbers. But for them to turn around and say, oh, we need to reduce this and that, while increasing things like public art and comms, that's not a good priority.
Well, sure, a couple of decorative fountains on the downtown east side, the poorest postal code in Canada. I'm sure that would cheer up the folks who are living on the streets right now.
Isn't it sad? It's really, really sad. And so we've actually got the stats here. Like, just to give you an example, the sort of things that they're spending money on. I don't know if you remember, but when they spent $30,000 on a teeter-totter, so they took a bus stop bench back in 2018. They ripped it out, and then they replaced it with an artisan teeter-totter for $30,000 instead of just using the plastic bench that was already there for people to wait for the bus. It's on East 51st Avenue. It's stuff like that. They spent $100,000, if you remember, on that wood neon sign in False Creek in 2017 that said, "Should I be worried?" $100,000. Like, why? Why are they doing that? And then turning around and jacking up the property taxes. And then, for example, the garbage collection, the budget, you can find it right on our website. The garbage collection budget dropped by 10% between 2015 and 2019. And again, if you ask the average property owner and taxpayer, they want garbage collection. That's one of their main priorities all the time. But lo and behold, that isn't the priority at City Hall. And what's really sad is that some people are just working so hard, they can't make ends meet, they don't have time to pay attention to this stuff. They can't go down to City Hall and sit through and wade through these budgets, but they're the ones paying the bill. And so we just encourage everybody, as best you can, man, get in touch with your local city councilor, because if you don't want to see 7% increases every year, you got to get on it. And I just saw recently, just today, it looked like they've managed to reduce their property taxes elsewhere, which is good in other parts of Metro Vancouver. So that was really nice to see. But in Vancouver City proper, your taxes have gone up.
Also, I wonder about the public art when Vancouver, by nature, in its setting, is already perhaps the world's prettiest city. Why do you have to use artificial means to make your natural city look great?
It's absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. It's one of the most beautiful places on earth, and it's not because of politicians, and it's not because of taxes, and this is not to beat up on art. We love art. We love art in publicly accessible places. We just don't think that the average taxpayer should be on the hook for this. There are other ways of doing this, of getting corporate sponsorship, of getting property owners to invest in pieces of art. Fine. Just go for it. And just by encouraging them, don't force them, but encourage this sort of thing to happen. Allow them to put a little plaque there showing who sponsored it. You know, we managed to have quote unquote public pieces of art all around the world. And other cities are able to do it without dinging the taxpayer for it. And lo and behold, it's still beautiful. And you're right, Vancouver needs very little help when it comes to being gorgeous.
Well, I also recall there was a city bench, just an ordinary bench, that a woman had decorated in memory of a loved one, and the city told her that was graffiti and take it out. But if you looked at it, it definitely was art.
Yes, exactly. And and to make matters worse, the governing body at the time wasn't doing the proper upkeep of benches. So they were deteriorating, the paint was flaking, and this lady came along, from what I can understand, with her own money that she spent on her own paint and improved it, but no, that's graffiti. And again, these aren't good priorities. And to give you an example, again, where credit is due, Port Coquitlam, I just saw Brad West, the mayor there, you probably talk to him quite frequently. Port Coquitlam Council approved their draft budget, and they've seen a 0.48% increase in taxes for the residents. 0.48%. And a 0.11% decrease for local businesses. That's great. We need to see more work like that actually happening around city council tables.
And if you want to beautify your city, City Hall could always just have a bunch of buckets full of flower seeds and stuff and tell people come along and beautify your neighborhood, and it would cost hundreds of dollars, not hundreds of thousands.
Yes, exactly. And I'll go you one further, my friend. I bet you if you put out the call to local businesses and garden supply stores and said, put your sign out in front of the massive, bin, they deliver them for free.
Exactly.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to spend a cent of taxpayer dollars. And
Canadians,
there you go. It's innovative stuff like that would make it so much better. But when you start doing things like growing your city staff, and it's like mission creep, right? But it's at the government level. And you start expanding your mandate and expanding your departments, they're going to find reasons to exist. They're going to find reasons to spend money. And they're going to have to get that money from us and from business property taxpayers. When I was covering it at City Hall, we got messages from a local business that was saying that his father-in-law is going out of business. He was an auto body repairman that had been on the corner there for like 40 years. And because of the business and property tax changes, he can't afford it anymore. He's folding up shop. And unfortunately, so is the one next door.
Municipal politicians love to take international junkets to so-called sister cities and so on, or international conferences on whatever, the preservation of wombats or whatever. Have you ever seen any examples of one of those politicians coming back saying, after I went to Lisbon, Portugal, I learned all these things and we're going to incorporate them here to make our city bigger, better, and more affordable?
Unfortunately not. I'm sure there are some, if you try to slice through the waste and the chaff, that you're eventually going to find some grain. There must be in there, but it's extremely rare. And this is where things get really sad. Just to give you an example, over in Victoria, the mayor of Victoria spent taxpayers' money to fly to New York City on a jet that burned 90,000 liters of jet fuel, return, of course, Victoria to New York, to watch one of her personal heroes, Greta Thunberg, speak in New York City. But then you turn around, and this is one of the mayors that, wants oil kept in the ground and is considering suing oil companies for climate change, and they're writing scolding letters to the people of Venezuela saying that they want climate change reparation money being paid to people of Victoria. Just strange priorities like that. Why didn't she just wait for Greta Thunberg to come to Vancouver? Then she could have taken BC Transit from downtown Victoria. She could have even racked her bike on the front of it if she wanted to, taken it over from Swartz Bay over the ferry to Tsawwassen, jumped on the bus there in Tsawwassen Ferry Terminal, taken it to SkyTrain, and ridden the Canada Line downtown. Why didn't she do that? She only had to wait a few weeks. But no, they'll travel round trip on our dime to New York City because it's exciting. Well, that's not what municipal politics is supposed to be for.
Well, Lisa Helps, the mayor of Victoria, is also the one that had the statue of Sir John A. Macdonald, our first prime minister, ripped down.
We still don't know exactly how much that costs. We know generally that it costs thousands of dollars to get the crane in and all that stuff. But what we want to know is how much time they spent discussing this. Because apparently they were holding meetings about this for a year leading up to its removal that nobody knew about. So we've been trying to find out for a while now how much those quote-unquote meetings were actually costing. So once we get the full final tally of removing that statue, we'll be able to let people know. And again, if this catches on, we could be, again, in for more tax increases. And what would it be paid for? Stuff like this.
Historical statues now, of course, times are different. We're more politically correct. Would it be a better use of taxpayer money if perhaps we put a plaque next to it explaining, the circumstances of why maybe their policies would be anti-Aboriginal now and wouldn't be allowed, but at the time that was the way they operated and they really truly didn't know any better?
That's a great question, and I've heard it suggested from other people that would be a better use of tax dollars. Good question. Maybe that's something that you have local votes about. Maybe that's something that you earnestly approach people with a fully open mind, and you ask them. Ask them in a referendum. Ask them in a vote. Do follow-ups. Ask them if this is important to them. And then there's also different elements of things like reconciliation that people are able to do. Just completely speaking personally, taking off my CTF hat and putting on my own personal hat. I've noticed a big difference in school systems where they're talking about it now, even to little kids in elementary school. That has a huge impact on people, and they really start to learn about it. Because speaking personally, when I was a kid growing up in the 80s, I didn't know about any of this stuff. I didn't know about residential schools. A lot of people didn't know about what they now call the 60s scoop that they talk about so often on Parliament Hill. And a lot of my age group, my cohort, same thing. They weren't taught this stuff in elementary or even high school. So now that's, especially in BC, I've noticed, that's changed. And so that is perhaps a better way of opening that conversation. But from a CTF taxpayer point of view, maybe it's one of those things that you put out in a very well-meaning, earnest survey, and you hold a referendum. You put it, so you don't spend a lot of extra money on it. You make it part of the next vote. So when you have to fill out your ballot, a part of it is a questionnaire on the bottom of it. And that way, it's pretty much paid for already.
Kris, I know we could talk forever when it comes to government waste and perhaps how we can correct it, and we'll save that for another show.
Thank you so much.
My guest has been Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Her website, taxpayer.com. If you have any questions for Kris or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@housestreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of House Street Media Incorporated.